I'm learning history in Cleveland, Tennessee. Ocoee Society.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Curious Curators. I'm Hope.
And I'm Lindsay.
And we have another historically inaccurate movie for you today. And honestly, you might think we're crazy for doing this one. Today we're going to talk about Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and a little bit
of the sequels, yeah.
And as crazy as this might seem, it's not actually historically inaccurate. It's not actually not completely historical. It's a fantasy, but there's a lot of history elements in it.
Oh, absolutely. I actually give it a lot more credit than I do to other movies that we've done previously, such as The Patriot or
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor. Yeah, that's a good one. They don't claim it to be historically accurate. I think the directors said they wanted it to have a historical feel.
Yeah.
But it was just a fantasy. So I give them a lot more credit for the things that they kept accurate with. And I was a lot less nitpicky with them because they said it's just they want a historical feel for their fantasy, and they've got like a time period they're thinking of. They don't ever give you an exact date.
Right.
They don't ever say this is exactly what we're doing. They never say this is on the backdrop of real history.
Right. We're not doing a history lesson, but there is a little bit of a history lesson in it. I don't know what I was talking about when I first started. I was just it all left me, but that's okay. Yeah, so this first movie came out in 2003. So it's a little bit older.
God, that doesn't feel like that long.
No, it doesn't. I kind of remember seeing these like in theaters.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like 17 years ago that I saw these in theaters.
Ooh.
And as you guys know, this movie is rated PG-13, and this is the first Disney movie that was ever rated PG-13.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm not sure exactly how they picked the ratings, but it really wasn't that bad. Like, what, they talk about rum a little bit, and that's the worst.
Well, there were prostitutes.
Oh, yeah, I guess there were prostitutes. Did they ever say they were prostitutes? No.
They made many insinuations.
So did Aladdin.
Okay.
Right, that's another conversation, I guess. So this is actually another Jerry Bruckheimer film. We stand Jerry Bruckheimer, apparently. Last week was too, or last month.
I mean, maybe you do. I was not a big fan of our last movie.
Oh, I loved it. We've already talked about it.
know.
I loved it. I would love if there was a little bit more romance in this one, but again, neither here nor there, right?
There was plenty of romance, my God.
And this was, I kind of read that this idea had been around since the 1990s to do a pirate film, a supernatural pirate film. But
Based on the ride or in general?
based on the ride. But the genre of pirate movies just wasn't doing well, like since the mid-70s.
Are you kidding me? What about Muppet Treasure Island? That was a gem.
Well,
That was a gem of cinema.
why don't you go ahead and give Walt Disney Studios a call and ask them, because I'm not sure. But it said that like big budget pirate movies weren't doing well.
Hook, also a gem of cinema.
That was a Disney movie too, wasn't it? It had to have been if it was Peter Pan. Yeah. Hook was good though.
Hook was really good.
But this was like a new era of pirate movies, I guess. And I mean, I think they did a great job.
Oh, absolutely. I love this movie.
I love this movie. I thought the characters were cast beautifully. I love
Yes.
Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow.
Yep.
I love Orlando Bloom as a person. I love Keira Knightley in any movie as well. I always like her in historical movies. I think she does such a good job. But I guess we could maybe get into the movie a little bit. Do you want to summarize it for us?
Okay, sure. I watched it last night with my cats, so it was an exciting weekend. That's what happens when you can't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
So, we essentially begin in Port Royal, Jamaica, which does not exist at that time, but, you know.
It's fine.
We start in Port Royal. I guess the movie does open with finding the shipwreck and a boy. Then we skip to 10 years later. The boy has grown up, and so is the girl who found him. They're goggle-eyed over each other. but they're from different classes, so they can't really.
She's the governor's daughter, and he's the blacksmith. A fantastic blacksmith, but no one knows that because he's like an apprentice.
Yeah. His mentor gets all the credit, although he just drinks and
Sleeps.
passes out. Yes. So basically, pirates attack Port Royal. They are preceded by a different pirate known as Captain Jack Sparrow. Then later, after he is captured and put in prison, the Black Pearl attacks Port Royal, a mythical ship. And they kidnap, essentially, Elizabeth. Half kidnap, half she
Calls for a parley. She is kidnapped, taken aboard the Black Pearl because they believe that she is the daughter of William Turner, or Bootstrap Bill. I have a contention with that, but we'll get to it.
All right. And she holds the last of a set of 882 cursed medallions. And they know that they need her blood to lift this curse that has been placed on the Black Pearl.
Right. And the whole crew of the Black Pearl at
Yes.
this point.
So Will, in an effort to go after Elizabeth, frees Jack Sparrow because he's been talking about the Black Pearl. And they set off on a high seas adventure after the Black Pearl to save Elizabeth. They go to Tortuga, they get a crew, they commandeer a ship.
Commandeer a ship.
They commandeer a ship.
They borrow it with no intentions of returning it.
Oh, absolutely. They gave it to Anna Maria, but they continue to follow the Black Pearl. The whole plot is revealed as you go that Jack Sparrow was once the captain of the Black Pearl. There was a mutiny against him for this treasure, essentially. And so he gets marooned on an island. The crew and Barbosa, the captain of the Black Pearl, who was the first mate, now captain, takes the crew to get this cursed Aztec gold. And they basically kill Bootstrap Bill Turner, who I still don't understand this exactly, but what apparently it was his blood they needed to
I think
lift the curse.
they must have all had to put in like a blood
Maybe so.
sacrifice or whatever, and then his was like the missing one.
Yeah, they never clarify that, but they strap a cannon to him
And
toss him into the sea because he didn't think it was right what they did.
And he had sent one of these medallions. Like to England.
Yes.
To his child.
Yes.
Which we see at the
Was
very beginning.
Will Turner, the blacksmith. So there's a whole lot of things going on. The pirates are going after the Black Pearl, and the Royal Navy is going after the pirates, Will Turner and Jack Sparrow, who are going after the Black Pearl. It's a whole high seas adventure that essentially culminates in the lifting of the curse and Will and Elizabeth getting together and Jack Sparrow escaping the hangman's noose
At the expense of the most tragic character in the entire movie, Commodore Norrington.
Yes, absolutely.
Poor guy, so tragic.
And he basically becomes captain of the Black Pearl again. All the other pirates are apparently arrested by the Royal Navy, et cetera, et cetera. Happy endings all around until later movies.
Yeah, their happy ending lasts like what, a month?
Yeah.
It's not a very long happy ending. But I guess we can start at Port Royal. So Port Royal was a real city and a pirate haven. It was a haven for pirates and privateers. It was very close to shipping lanes. It was close to straits that would give you safe passage. It had a large harbor, so you could dock your ship, you could clean your ship, you could repair your ship, and it was a really good location for raiding other settlements because you're right there. And for a little while, like pirates were protecting Port Royal. But then on June 7th, 1692 at 11:43 a.m.
Oh, good. I know. I'm glad we know the exact time.
There was a pocket watch found.
Oh, okay.
That had stopped at that exact time. But there was a very large earthquake, and it destroyed parts of the city there were 3 forts. Fort Charles, which is where we are in the movie, I'm pretty sure we would have to be, is the only fort that survived.
Okay.
And a large portion of the city sank. It was built on this like horrible like wet sand stuff, so everything just literally went right into the water. So this was Pirates of the Caribbean is probably set around 1720.
Yeah, they said it was between 1720 and 1750 loosely.
Yeah, so Port Royal wouldn't have really been like this huge stronghold at that point. And
And there was a second earthquake in 1704.
Well, that and a fire in 1703, a bunch of hurricanes, and a flood in 1722. So it was just a doomed city. So they probably would have been literally anywhere else, but Port Royal is a good like landing point, I guess. So that's why the movie kind of takes place there.
Well, in all honesty, Kingston had kind of taken over this role of Port Royal by that time. So literally they just could have said Kingston.
Yeah, I guess Port Royal has like a ring to it, I guess. Like it sounds nicer. But it was also a place where a lot of famous pirates did hang out, right? Blackbeard was rumored to have been there. Henry Morgan.
Your favorite.
My favorite pirate. We all probably know about Henry Morgan, whether you know that you know him or not, because Captain Morgan rum is named after Henry Morgan. And it was just one of those kind of places, but it was also, it turned out to be a really bad place for pirates. In 1687, Jamaica passed anti-piracy laws. So instead of being like a haven, it literally became a spot of execution. In 1720, Charles Vane, Calico Jack, and Mary Read were killed. And then in 1722, in 1 month, they executed 41 pirates. That's more than one person a day. Maybe they took Sundays off. I don't know. But it's more than one person a day. So by this point, do you remember when he's sailing into Port Royal and there's the bodies hanging?
Yeah.
And he salutes them? So that would have been real.
Oh, absolutely. That was actually called gibbet, which is where you display either prisoners or dead bodies. And that was a common practice. It was they displayed prisoners. Do you remember those prisoner cages?
Yeah.
You see them in a lot of movies anyways, but the prisoner cages that hang from high points and you have live prisoners in them.
Oh, yeah.
Same idea. They also would hang dead bodies like that, and they were warnings to other criminals.
That's so morbid, isn't it?
Yeah.
And probably it smelled terrible.
And it was something that went on during this time, during public executions and everything.
That's not for me. But Tortuga, which we also mentioned, was also
real
pirate haven in Haiti. And Tortuga is still a city today.
Yeah.
And it was, like, they had this thing called the Brethren of the Coast.
Yep.
So it was a coalition of pirates, which I think is kind of cool because later on they'll talk about the Brethren Court and everything, which is a coalition of pirates. Yeah. And Tortuga, now my Caribbean geography leaves much to be desired, I'll be honest, but apparently it could be used as a hideout, and I'm not sure if that's because there was like a strange coastline or if it was because there was just a lot of like land around it that they could.
Well, it is really close to the mainland, but at the same time, it's called Tortuga because apparently when they saw it, the geography looked like a turtle. Because Tortuga
is turtle in Spanish.
Yeah. So it could have been the geography as well.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. You know more about geography than I do.
So I was kind of sad, and I think you were too, when we learned that Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life for Me was not a real pirate song.
I was pretty upset about that. It's an older song. It was written in the 60s, but that's not old enough for us. We need it to be older. I thought it was real.
Yeah, I thought that was a pirate shanty.
Yeah.
A sea shanty.
A sea shanty.
But during that first scene, we are introduced to Gibbs.
Oh, yes, I like Gibbs.
One of the recurring characters, and he says that having, a woman aboard is bad luck, which was true. That was and that still is a sailor's superstition, is having a woman aboard is bad luck. But naked women as your figurehead of your ship is good luck because they calm the seas. But I noticed that the Black Pearls wasn't naked, but that's probably because it's a Disney movie.
Right, she just couldn't be naked.
but there were certain, and he also warns her about singing that song. There were certain words and sayings that were considered bad luck, and it kind of varied place to place and person to person, but there were things that were considered bad luck to say. You also weren't allowed to whistle. Whistling was bad luck. You also couldn't do any personal grooming on board a ship, which
And
kind
her
of
hair
explains
was,
a lot.
but her hair was so fixed. She was just cursing them left and right.
Oh, yeah.
I guess that does explain why they're a little, like a ragtag crew, because like,
Yeah.
what are they gonna do?
Yeah. But in doing this research, I'm thinking that Jack Sparrow was kind of based on Calico Jack because he uses his Jolly Roger.
Yes, I saw that as well. The Jolly Roger, and the swords are meant to be his two lovers, Anne Reed and
Anne Bonny and Mary Reed.
Yes, I always get them confused. But yes, I read that's what the two swords stood for.
I don't know. He
I
was
don't know.
supposedly jealous of Mary Reed and how much time she spent with Anne Bonny. I don't think he was involved with Mary Reed.
I don't know. It's
Who
a
knows?
nice story though, isn't it?
Yeah. But his name is Jack.
Right.
He also was okay with having women aboard, obviously, and so was Jack Sparrow.
Right.
Because he even says that later, it would be far worse not to.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. There are certain things about Calico Jack's life I wonder if he was at least the namesake for Jack Sparrow.
It's very possible.
But I do have like a point of contention with the entire crux of the story, which is the Aztec Gold.
Oh, I read so much about that. Okay, you go first.
Aztecs didn't have coins. They did not have forms of currency really like that. It was mostly trade, but the closest thing they had, the thing that they used the most was cacao beans
Okay.
and chocolate. And
Also my favorite form of currency.
that was used as currency most often, but the closest thing they had was something called, get this, hoe money. And it was called hoe money because it was copper that was in the shape of a farming hoe.
Okay. We'll go with that. So, to them, copper was more valuable than gold. Gold was ornamentation, right? It was like jewelry.
Well,
and-
yeah, I wouldn't say that copper was more valuable than gold or anything like that. It was for different purposes.
Right.
And, the hoe money you could carry around. People weren't going to carry around gold.
Right. Well, I also read about, let me just make sure I'm kind of getting it right. Okay. They call it like Cortez's treasure, right?
Yeah.
And there was this like one night that Cortez and all of his men were kind of attacked. And they had been carrying way too much gold. They loaded themselves down with gold. And they barely made it out with their lives, right? All of them. And that gold was, I assume, reappropriated by everyone around. But I assumed that is what they were talking about, like Cortez's treasure, because the treasure ships that went to Spain made it to Spain.
Yeah.
And there were a couple other like legends that I was reading about, saying that at one point when Montezuma was captured, he had told everyone to like hide their gold, and that there were large caches of gold in Arizona. And then there's a lot of lost gold mines in Arizona as well, but that's quite far from where we are. So I'm thinking that, La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. I'm thinking it probably came from that night.
Okay.
Because they said that, like when I was reading about it, basically some people grabbed like a little bit of gold and would put it in their pockets. But then some people, like Cortez, were like filling up wagons full of gold. And while gold is quite a malleable metal, it's not that light. I mean, chests of anything aren't light, right? So they couldn't move fast enough to get away. And they ended up, pretty much everyone except for the people that weren't that greedy and just like took a piece, lost all of their treasure. So I was assuming that that's what he was talking about with like Cortez's treasure, was like that lost treasure. But I guess probable, like not probable, but possible, because it happened, a good amount of time before. So it wasn't like the years were really off or anything, but also it was quite far from like where they were but I guess you can.
Well, we
move.
don't really know where Isla de Muerta is. It's an island that can't be found except for by those who already know where it is.
And with that one compass.
And with that one compass, which gets really confusing throughout the mythology of.
Yeah.
But the Aztec coins that they have really didn't look like a lot of their pressed art, but I think the inspiration came from the calendar stone, and that's kind of the ubiquitous image you think of Aztec art. It's the big circular stone. And the face in the middle kind of resembles Aztec statues more than Aztec depictions on paper. A lot of times the depictions on paper were done in profile. But it could have been Mictlantecuhtli, and he was the god of death.
That's fitting.
Like god of the underworld, I guess.
I think that's quite fitting, honestly.
Because he was depicted often as skeletal, so that could have been Mictlantecuhtli. But yeah, I didn't understand necessarily the curse or anything like that. But I mean, I guess, coming from the god of the underworld, turning them into skeletons would make sense.
And there's probably something with the moon.
Yeah.
But also, okay, coming off of that, this is just a plot point that bothered me.
Okay.
So they had all taken a piece of the treasure, and that cursed them. So these guys were all on a pirate ship with Bootstrap Bill. Like, they were friends, right?
Okay.
Okay. So he sends this piece of 8, or whatever they're calling it, this little medallion, to England to his son. His friends didn't know that he had a son. They thought he had a daughter. And then Jack Sparrow just knew that it was a son. Like, how? Like, you're telling me...
Did he know it was a son, or he just figured it out as soon as he was like, my name's William Turner?
Well, either way, he was smarter than Barbossa, who was just like, oh, yep, that must be her. Her last name's Turner. Like...
Well, I mean... Barbossa aside, we did see the intelligence of some of those pirates.
True.
Like,
I just feel like what else are they going to do on a ship? Like in the ocean, what are you going to do? You run out of things to do. Like if you're just sailing along, I would think you would talk, and he'd be like, "My son."
He could have played it close to the vest and just said, "My kid."
I guess he could have. To me, that was just like
fair
a
point, but I mean, he could have.
I mean, if that's the biggest plot hole, like it's fine.
Yeah.
But, speaking of Barbossa, I did read that he might have been based on Barbarossa, who was a Turkish pirate.
Yeah,
And had like the same kind of thing. He was a pirate, and then he became like a fleet admiral in the Navy, and was like, kind of going out because Barbossa ends up like selling out and working for the Navy for a little while.
As a privateer.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, and that's accurate too. A lot of those pirates would jump the line over from privateer to pirate a lot. I mean, it was really a piece of paper that made you legal or not as a privateer.
Yeah, and didn't some of them get in trouble because they would lose their papers and stuff?
I think Henry Morgan got in trouble just because he didn't keep up with it. Like, you're supposed to get your legal documentation done every certain amount of time, and he would just let his expire and just continue on.
I understand.
Yeah,
same.
I mean, my passport is still expired, so...
Oh, yours is expired? I've been trying to get mine for the last 4 months. It's processing with the wrong birthday, so, it's fine.
Yeah, 1941, I believe, is when you were born.
Yeah, the lady had a really good laugh when she told me about that.
But there were a few other things that came up while I was watching. Tattoos were probably not a big thing because they weren't really brought back into they weren't really popular until Captain Cook's voyage to Polynesia in 1774.
Oh, okay.
And that's even where the word came from, was that journey, because it was the native word, I believe, was tatau.
Okay, so we were just like a bit ahead then.
Yeah. There was also that the East India Trading Company actually did brand people as pirates. This was really hard for me to find, but apparently they did. but it was on their foreheads.
Yeah, so I'm curious if it was like right here or if it was like right. I mean, you don't see pictures of it.
Probably right in the center,
Right, so you
that you
couldn't
can see
hide
them.
it
Yeah.
from your.
Well, and that's not unheard of. Chinese criminals were often branded as criminals with a tattoo in the middle of their forehead. So, I mean, that idea was in the region of China, which,
Right.
could have been permeated to India and places like that,
Right.
where they got the idea. The argument is putting a P on the middle of Jack Sparrow's forehead would have been really distracting for the whole movie. So
Yeah, that's why it's on his wrist. But
Yeah.
also, like, Commodore Norrington being all grabby and, like, ripping his shirt sleeve up. I was like, oh, slow down, sir. I would have been so annoyed. I hate it when people, like, grab you, so I would have been so annoyed. But, of course, that was just so you could see the P. But, I mean, I guess he was good. He could just look at him and be like, must be a pirate.
Well, and apparently he can read tattoos enough to know that his tattoos said his name was Jack Sparrow. I see the sparrow.
Yeah.
I didn't see the Jack.
No. But, like, some people are really talented at things like that, and maybe that's just, like, Norrington's, like...
But that's just another thing, though, is the tattoos didn't come into prominence until 1774. So even if Jack had been sailing the ocean blue and went to Polynesia on his own and got tattooed,
Yeah.
Norrington wouldn't have been able to identify it.
And
But
honestly, I don't think that that's something they teach in, like, the British Navy anyway. So, speaking of the British Navy, their uniforms. So, he was wearing the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading about how actual, like, rules for officers' uniforms and everything weren't put into place until, like, the 1740s. So he was really ahead of his time by having everyone dressed just like him in the same, like, outfit. The blue with the white, which was actually what Navy outfits were meant to look like at that time. You saw the two guys that were, like, guarding the boat in the dock that were in the red. And then the Navy would apparently wear blue. I guess that, one, shouldn't be a surprise, and two, is something I never thought about. But, yeah.
Well, it was accurate for the uniform that they would have used.
Right.
Like, the buttons were from the Georgian era from 1714. They were in use from 1714 until 1830 when the uniforms were changed. So this was an accurate depiction of those uniforms. And the corset, I believe, was accurate as well.
Oh, and the dress that she put on.
But it likely would have been comfortable. A well-fitting corset of that era was typically comfortable enough to breathe in.
Well, and they made it seem like, had she never, ever worn a corset before?
That's what I didn't get.
Because
they've had them forever.
And the other women that were, like, prancing around in Port Royal were also dressed in the same style. So they would have all been wearing that. Yeah,
I don't know if maybe she just never wanted to, but she acted like she'd never seen one before.
Yeah, and to me, that was also a little bit strange because when we're just, like, walking up in that, like, next scene with her in it, we're, like, coming toward the overlook of the sea or whatever, and all of those women are wearing the same thing.
Yeah.
And you would think, as the governor's daughter, she would be one of the more high-ranking people in town, meaning that she would always be dressed well. In my opinion.
Yeah.
I would think she would always be dressed relatively well. But maybe, who knows? Maybe we're wrong. I think there were some interesting things, like, in the other movies as well, that were kind of truthful, I guess.
Yeah. we already kind of started talking about the East India Trading Company a little bit. That was fairly truthful.
Yeah, and they kind of come into play a little bit later, and they're based on the East India Company that we've all heard about for our whole lives. I did look up. I was curious about Davy Jones' locker because I was like, was Davy Jones a person? Like, tell me more. So apparently, Davy Jones' locker is just a euphemism for the bottom of the sea.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like where pirates go, if they drown or anything. But the first mention of this with like negative connotations comes from Daniel Defoe in 1726. So we're kind of around that time period. You're Robinson Crusoe, right? I think so. But not that that's.
I had a different date for.
Oh, what
the
date did
first-
you have?
1751.
Oh, okay, well.
Who knows?
Either
It's around
way-
that time. They said 1720 to 1750.
So either way, they might be like a little bit early, but still like relatively close.
I also, Singapore is mentioned both in this movie and it comes up much later. During this time, Singapore's trading port was out of use. And I mean for a long time. It wasn't just around this time. For about a century, it was out of use. It had been bombed in the 17th century, so in the 1600s. And it kind of slipped into obscurity until the 1800s. So it wasn't this big hub like it's depicted in the movie at World's End, and the reference to clearly you've never been to Singapore makes no sense because there wasn't really... There were people living there and everything, but it wasn't this huge trading hub that it had been in the past.
So maybe it's just because it's kind of a well-known name, and it's easier to throw in a well-known name than to pick like an obscure one, but you would think that there's other ports near that.
Because there were definitely other ports near that.
It's not like they just close off like an entire part of the world.
Yeah, the Strait of Malacca was always this huge region of piracy. It still is today.
Okay.
It's very easy to commit piracy in that area because of the narrow causeways and everything. But at that time, and for a while, Singapore was pretty much had fallen into obscurity and was not a big trading hub. So it's a bit strange to make that reference and for that to be such a big location.
Yeah.
But I guess Port Royal was destroyed by several earthquakes and a fire, and they still use that.
And I wouldn't think that Port Royal is something that like people just know about. Like, that's not really a place that, unless you like pirates and you like the history of that, it's not really a place that you're like, Port Royal.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, I guess when I think of the Caribbean, I don't really think of any like hard pirate ports anyway, so maybe that's just my mistake. Maybe Port Royal is very well known and I just didn't know.
Probably now.
Well, yeah, now I'm sure it's like very well known.
And maybe that's why they avoided Kingston, because that's still a city.
That's true. I guess it could be. And you don't want to drive like mad tourism for pirates to like a random place.
I don't know, ask Kingston. Maybe they do want that tourism.
Or maybe they do have that tourism because Port Royal is gone.
Yeah, true.
I also looked up the Flying Dutchman because I remember on SpongeBob they meet the Flying Dutchman as well.
Yes,
so
they
he's,
do.
Like, quite common. But apparently the Flying Dutchman was like a legendary ghost ship. The ship could never make port, and it's doomed to sail the oceans forever. Which, you know, makes sense since SpongeBob is quite modern and this happened a couple hundred years ago. But so they're saying that this myth probably came from the 17th century golden age of the Dutch East India Company.
All right.
And the oldest version has been dated to the late 18th century, but people in the 19th and 20th centuries still saw the Dutchman, and it was glowing with a ghostly light. And if another ship tried to hail it, the crew of the Dutchman will try to send messages to land to people that are long dead. And this ship is like a forebearer of doom. So you don't ever want to see the Flying Dutchman, which I guess they stuck kind of close to that myth. They could, Will does get to come to land like once every 10 years, and they break the curse and everything. But they do, I mean, it's a real myth. What is that even? It's a real myth, but...
It's not something Disney came up with like Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life for me.
Yeah, well, and apparently any kind of songs that we think are pirate songs, because the other one where it's like 99 bottles of rum and all that, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote that in the late 1800s for Treasure Island.
Oh.
That's so disappointing, isn't it? I know. So none of them were actually song. I mean, I personally believe that I'm sure pirates sing songs.
Oh, absolutely. What else are you going to do on
Exactly. What else?
You can't do personal grooming.
And you're not going to find out about each other's kids, so you might as well sing songs together.
Don't trim your nails.
Oh, gosh. Could you imagine, like, how scraggly you would be getting off that dirty? Or baths, personal grooming?
Scurvy. What are you going to take a bath with? The limited supply of water?
Right, so they would drink the water first, and then the beer, and then they would drink rum. That is actually true. Pirates would drink rum because it has a longer shelf life.
You know, the rum runners were actually a thing, too, in that era, because when they get marooned on that island, which is also true, you did get marooned it was part of one pirate's code. So the pirate's code was not one singular code.
Right.
Each pirate ship had their own code. But in one pirate's code, I believe it might have been Captain Morgan, if one of the punishments was getting marooned on an island with a bottle of water and a pistol with a single shot.
Well,
wonder what that's for.
A flare gun.
A flare gun. But, you know, in the movie, Captain Jack Sparrow says this was a place for the rum runners, which was actually a thing because the high taxes that were levied on alcohol in the colonies during that time, rum running was really popular.
Right, and they had sugar plantations in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
So you could just make the rum, which is like Caribbean rum now still. You would make the rum and just like slide it into port and sell it and make money.
Yep, very profitable because of the high taxes. So, I mean, those parts of it were accurate as well.
Surprisingly accurate.
Yeah, there were a lot of things in here that were surprisingly accurate. And the fact that they said that wasn't their intention and that they had a time period of 1720 to 1750 meant they could be pretty loose with props and with exact dates. Like, there is... So at Commodore Norrington's promotion ceremony...
Oh, poor Commodore.
They sing... or what's playing is Rule Britannica.
Oh, yeah, I listened to that the other day.
Which was composed in 1740, so it does fit into that 1720 to 1750 timeline. So does the naval uniform. So do the naval uniforms and all of that stuff. So they were really able to play within that 30-year time span.
I'm not sure if you like looked this part up, but like Commodore isn't like necessarily a rank. It's like someone that's in charge of a lot of ships. So it was so they didn't have to pay people as admirals. It was so they could pay less money.
Oh.
And they just called you like, I mean, so I guess technically it's like a rank, but it's not like admiral or something.
So I've come to refer to you to a lot of the military stuff. Here's a question, and this might just be a question we can put out there. At this time, remember during Pearl Harbor, you said that soldiers got paid more if they were married?
Yes.
When he is trying to propose to Elizabeth, he said, "This promotion has thrown into sharp relief that which I have not yet achieved, a marriage to a fine woman." Do you think that was like, I mean, obviously it was, he's getting older, he's doing all these things, but he never married anyone. But do you think there was also that thought that, hey, why haven't you married? Because if you marry, you'll get paid more.
Well, let's put this out there, but they're in the British Army.
Yeah.
So I know American soldiers today are paid more, but I do not know if like government did that back then. I don't know if British soldiers today are paid more.
It would have made
married.
sense because, you know, the wives were essentially confined to the home. They usually weren't employed, especially in higher classes.
Right.
So giving them more money to provide for both them and their wives.
And I kind of believe it also might have been a status symbol for him to marry her. I mean, not
Right,
that he was
governor's
just like
daughter.
not that he was just like nothing, or
Right.
you know, he's clearly a pretty good guy. And I thought he was a nice guy, which is
Oh, yeah.
a little bit surprising for a semi-wealthy man of that time, I think.
One of the things I really liked about this movie just overall is that you like all the characters. None of them, even the bad guys, are not irredeemable.
Like, yeah, Barbossa cut her hand.
Yes!
Like, he just cut her hand.
And he was like, waste not. You
I know, like, he
was,
could have slit her throat. That
Yeah.
was dark, sorry.
Well, no, but that was what she thought was going to happen, and he definitely terrorized her a little bit, but
If
he
he
didn't...
If he'd said, hey, I'm just going to cut your hand, I would have been like, oh, all right, like, take it.
He definitely made her think that she was going to be killed, and even in the following movies, he becomes something of an anti-hero
Yeah.
in many cases, and Commodore Norrington was just this
Tragic.
poor guy who was always trying to do the right thing. You know, he gave Captain Jack Sparrow a head start. When Elizabeth said, I want to marry Will instead, he's like, this is where your heart truly lies. And she says yes. And he's like, he just tells Will to take care of her.
I know,
Just actually a
angel.
good guy.
Like, the unsung hero of this movie, actually.
Yeah. And then he sacrifices himself at the end so that Elizabeth and the rest of the crew can get away.
10 out of 10 would watch Commodore Norrington's life play out in a movie.
Oh, absolutely. So there was really no person in this movie that was bad to me. I
No.
really thought they were all likable and all enjoyable characters, and they were multifaceted. Nobody was just evil to the bone.
Yeah, like everyone had like good and bad qualities.
Yeah.
Like I thought Elizabeth had some like bad qualities.
Oh, well, yeah.
But that I think they're also quite normal. But she has like
Yeah.
such a savior complex, and I'm like, can you just sit down for a second? Like, you would have been okay because she's like, and then she like, I always hate it when like a nice person's heart just gets destroyed. And poor Commodore Norrington, she's
Yeah.
like, that can be my wedding gift, and he's like, okay, we'll do it. And then she's like, well, now that you mention it, I don't really want to marry you. And I'm like, you're horrible. I'll marry you. But, like, I don't know. Because, I mean, I think that they all have some, like, annoying qualities, but I think that also makes them more relatable in a way that
Yeah.
it's hard to be relatable to, like, a pirate. So I thought that was...
Yeah, some of them are definitely embarrassing. Like, Will I Avast? That was
Oh,
so
gosh, I know.
All right,
Poor
we've
guy.
gotten off topic.
We have, as usual.
Is there anything else we would like to talk about before we wrap up this podcast?
I think I've mentioned everything that I wrote down that I've been able to read.
Yeah,
about
I
you?
think we hit on most of my topics. Walking the plank was mostly folklore, but some people say there were accounts of walking the plank. But
You would think the plank would get in the way of like everyday activities on a
Yeah.
ship, but who knows?
it seems a little extra too. You could just throw them overboard. But apparently that was mostly folklore. And the first mention of it was in the late 18th century. But I mean, I'm not
Oh,
gonna
can we
nitpick it.
mention that Cotton's parrot was
Cotton's
actually
parrot.
Cotton's parrot, who we have here with us today. No, we have a stuffed parrot. For what reason, we're not sure. No, Cotton's
Because
parrot.
we had one.
Yeah, well, we don't know why we had one, but we have one. But yeah, Cotton's parrot, that was a real bird, 2 real birds, and
Well, yes, obviously. It was Cotton's parrot was played by 2 birds,
Yes.
2 macaws.
and they were called Chips and Salsa,
Yeah.
and that was the whole thing I wanted to say about it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the highlight of our learning experience through this podcast
Yes.
was learning that Cotton's parrot was played by 2 macaws named Chip and Salsa.
Yeah. All right, guys, we'll be back next week.
Drink up me hearties, yo ho.
Yo ho, my friend, yo ho.